started, shall we? Heavenly Father, tonight again, as we come into your presence to see what you have for us, Lord, I pray that you will speak to our hearts, that you'll let the voice of your word take root in our hearts. And I want you to anoint the word as it goes out, anoint my lips to say only those things that you'd have to be said, and anoint our hearts to receive. And I thank you in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen. Well, we're going to finish up Samson tonight.
Okay.
I hope you have a little different view of Samson based on last week's, and we're going to continue that a little bit tonight. So we'll read Judges chapter 16, beginning with verse 3. Beginning with verse 1. Yes, thank you. 1 to 3. Memory's going, eyes are going. What is it? Now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there, and went in to her. When the Gazites were told, Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. They were quiet all night, saying, in the morning, when it is daylight, we will kill him. And Samson lay low till midnight. Then he arose at midnight, took hold of the doors of the gate of the city, and 2 gate posts, pulled them up, bar and all, put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. This is one of those interesting stories about Samson. Now we know Samson was in Gaza. Now Gaza, of course, as we know, was a Philistine city. In fact, it was a stronghold. It was one of the main strongholds of the Philistines. This was like, it'd be like a capital, maybe a state capital like we have, something like that. So this was a pretty good-sized city. It wasn't some little town. I've heard stories, it was just a little town out there, and they had a little 5-foot wide gate. No, the first place the Philistines were large. In fact, Gaza is another name for the city where Goliath came from later with David. Hold on just a minute. I see something I got to deal with here. Yeah. Love Microsoft. Anyway, so it was a big city. I mean, it wasn't some little tiny town. It was a good-sized city. And so there was Samson. Now, it would not be unusual for Samson to go there. Now, he had already judged Israel for 20 years. So saying he was in his 20s, maybe early 30s, when he started judging Israel, he was someplace in his 40s and 50s by this time. He wasn't some teenager, whatever. And it seems that the way that Samson judged Israel was he didn't lead an army, we know that. He probably judged like every other judge. If there was a dispute, they brought it to Samson. Samson would go to the priest. He went through that, same as the rest of the judges. But in his delivering Israel, it seems like it was skirmish by skirmish. In other words, he'd go out and walk into a town like Gaza, and if they would attack him, the Spirit of the Lord would come on him, and he would just wipe them out. And it seemed like this was what he was doing. Now, we have no record of that. No record whatsoever. However, as we find tonight from how the Philistines treated Samson and their expressed desire to put him out of business could not have been predicated on what happened 20 years before when the Spirit of the Lord came on him at Edom and all of that. That wouldn't last 20 years, drive them to the point that we're going to see them go to tonight. So it's quite obvious, I think, that he was judging. This was the way he judged. He would go from town to town, walk through. If somebody wanted to challenge him, he'd just wipe them out. And then that was the way he controlled the Philistines. They weren't going to come after him. They weren't going to invade Israel because they didn't know how many he could kill. and he seemed to be invincible. So it was the fear factor, and I think we call him today a terrorist, you know. He had them so afraid of him that they wouldn't do anything. And so he was in Gaza, and he went in to see a harlot. Well, you know, today that's, you know, but in those days that wasn't necessarily something that wasn't done, even amongst the godly men of Israel. I mean, they go into their concubines and their, you know, Abraham, concubines and harlots and all of that. So it was before the, it was, wasn't before the law, but it was at a time when things were much lean, I don't know how you put it, I don't want to give the wrong impression, but things seem to be more accepted than they are today, or were previous and sometimes before that. So he was in at this harlot's house, and some way the men of Gaza heard that he was there. And so they figured what they would do is they would surprise him in the morning. Now, no doubt what they were expecting was he was going to be up all night partying with this woman, and when he came out, he was going to be so tired and wore out that, you know, a group of men could land on him in secret by the gate, jump out and stab him or spear him or whatever, and kill him at the gate. That was their whole intent. Now, what I find is interesting here is that they were quiet all night long. In other words, they didn't come after him. You would think, you know, if you were going to do something, they'd get around the harlot's house and then, you know, 1 o'clock in the morning, beat down the door and rush in and kill him. That would make the sense, the way we would think about it. But they also knew that he would probably be expecting something like that.
Yeah.
And so they thought, well, we'll do it just the opposite. We're gonna just wait at the gate, nice and quiet all night long. And when sunrise comes and he comes walking out of the harlot's house, we're gonna nail him. Well, didn't quite work that way. Notice it says that Samson now, how he knew they were out there, we don't know. We also don't know, nothing is said here about the Spirit of the Lord coming on him. I think it did, don't get me wrong. So I think the Spirit told him and warned him. And so he just laid low in the harlot's house. And that's kind of a, you know, you think about it, and he's probably sitting over in a chair, just sitting there watching the clock. And let's see, of course they didn't have clocks, but you know, waiting for his time to leave. And about midnight, he decided it was time to go. So here are the men waiting around the gate. They're hiding in the little niches and crannies around the gate, waiting for Samson to come out at daylight. And I can see Samson as he just gets up at midnight and quietly walks out, walks down to the gate. They're not expecting anybody to come up at that hour of the night. He gets a hold of the gate. Well, this is the part that's really interesting. They're all waiting around to kill him. They know those gates are being picked up in the air and they're moving. Can you imagine what those men thought when suddenly the gates are picked up? He didn't even unbar them. The bar was across the gate. He pulled it clear out of the rocks and the mortar that were holding the posts up. And you know, you can see the rocks coming down, and all of a sudden this gate is moving away from him. And Samson puts it on his shoulders, and he walks for a half hour up onto the hill. And you know, I picture this, and to me it's kind of funny. But there was a hill, I think it was probably the right hill, was Hill Montar, El Montar, that's what it's called. It's a hill actually on top of a hill. You go up the first little hill, then there's another little hill. And it looks like he took it up on top of that hill because from that hill, you could see Hebron. Now, it doesn't mean that he took it to the hill named Hebron, or the mountain of Hebron. That would have been about a 2-day journey. So it's highly unlikely he carried the gates to take him there. But it meant that it was in this range, and they could see from there. And so he took those gates as if to say, hey, Hebron, look what I did. Set him on top of the mountain and went his way. It tickles me when I think about these soldiers, what they must have thought. But it also tells us how big Samson was. Not only tremendous strength, but he had to be able to hold that thing, you know, have a wingspan wide enough to be able to hold it. So he was a very large man. All right, so that was the story of Samson and the gates of the city. Now we move to probably the best known adventures of Samson, and that's with Delilah. So that's chapter 16, verses 4 to 20. Afterwards, it happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, "Entice him and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him. And every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me where your great strength lies, and with that you may be bound, and with what you may be bound to afflict you." And Samson said to her, "If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man." So the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, and she bound him with them. Now men were lying in wait, staying with her in the room. And she said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he broke the bowstrings as a strand of yarn breaks when it touches fire. So the secret of his strength was not known. Then Delilah said to Samson, "Look, you have mocked me and told me lies. Now please tell me what you may be bound with." So he said to her, "If they bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man." Therefore Delilah took new ropes and bound them with them and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And men were lying in wait, staying in the room. But he broke them off his arms like thread. Delilah said to Samson, "Until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with." And he said to her, "If you weave the 7 locks of my head into the web of the loom." So she wove it tightly with the batten of the loom and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he awoke from his sleep and pulled out the batten and the web from the loom. Then she said to him, "How can you say, 'I love you,' when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies." And it came to pass, when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him, so that his soul was vexed to death. So he told her all his heart and said to her, "No razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man." When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, "Come up once more, for he has told me all his heart." So the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands. Then she lured him to sleep on her knees and called for a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." So he awoke from his sleep and said, "I will go out as before at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. All right, this is probably one of the great love tragedies that's ever been written, I guess, is we're going to look at it from that point of view. But here we have Samson, and what he was doing in the valley was probably like he always did, making his rounds around from Philistine town to Philistine town, making sure everybody was behaving themselves and nobody was, trying to bother him or anybody else. But this particular this valley, the town, actually was probably the town of Kfar Sotek, was the name of the town. And it's a little town that's not very far from Zorah, where he was born and raised. Now it's very possible, and you just kind of have to use imagination, but it's very possible that Samson may have been playing with Delilah as kids. He was aware of her. The towns were close together. And they intermingled. They did things together in these towns. So it's very possible he knew her from the time she was a child. We don't know that. It just says that he fell in love with her. Now, it's from what the commentaries say, and I guess you could get it from that, was that she was very possibly a prostitute or a harlot. But maybe not. We don't know that. We do know that on some particular occasion, or more than one occasion, evidently he was a regular visitor to her, and at some point in time, the lords of the Philistines came to her. Now, who were these lords of the Philistines? So if we look back over into Judges chapter 3 and verse 3, we find that there were 7 lords over the Philistines, and they ruled 7 districts, if you will, within the Philistine. This is not your notes, so you have to write it down. Yeah. Within the area that the Philistines controlled, these were the 7 kings or rulers of those areas. And so the 7 of them came together. I'm sorry, 5, not 7, 5. The 5 of them came together and offered Delilah 5,500 pieces of silver if she could find out where Samson obtained his superhuman strength. 5,500. So each one was going to give her 1,100. So by 5, that would be 5,500 pieces of silver. Now that was about 5,500 shekels, or almost 2 talents of silver each. And that was the wages of a skilled worker, how much he would earn in 18 years.
Whoa, whoa.
So what they were saying was, we're going to give you a lifetime income as a skilled worker. We call them today professional. Today you look at the professionals and their wages are starting about $100,000 or right up in that area. So that kind of gives you some idea of how much they were offering her if she would find out where Samson's strength lay. So when I say they were desperate to get Samson out of the way, yeah, that's a pretty hefty fee to pay anybody.
Yeah.
18 years each. So that means, 5, she was covered till she was 100 years old if you wanted to take it that way. So it was a tremendous amount of money. About 90 years worth of wages, or about 10 talents of silver. So of course he asked her where his strength came from. Now probably what they were looking for was an amulet or some other magical object. The stories, that we read, King Arthur, he had this magic sword, and you have all of these, you got Captain America, and he's got the shield thing, going there, and somebody else has something else. I mean, there's something that makes them strong or superhero. And that same thought was here, probably an amulet or maybe something he ate, something in his diet, who knows. But they had to find out what it was. And so that's what they were expecting her to find out. And it's interesting, she started off, the first time she asked him, And he said, well, bowstrings. Now, bowstrings, are made from animal gut. They're stretched out. He says, don't dry it. Don't dry it. Leave it wet. And if you bind me with those, I won't be able to break them. And it's interesting that she bound his hands. Now, this was very possible in just playing around. She says, okay, Samson, let's see how strong you are. And she binds him up, He's so in love. Oh, sure, anything's fine. Really, I'm serious now. He had to really be starstruck. He was out there someplace with this woman. She had to really be somebody special. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah.
And so bound him up, and then as soon as he's bound up, she says, oh, the Philistines are on you. And he popped them loose. Where are they? And they were in the room with her. Now, what the Bible doesn't tell me, and what I would like to have been there to see, is what happened to the guys in the room. Oh, what are you doing here? What are you doing? Oh, bye. And throw them out the window. We wonder, what happened to the guys in the room? Nothing, nobody ever tells us. But we do know that this happened over a long period of time. Because, the first time it happened, and then, she, probably the next time he came or whatever, well, Samson, you didn't tell me, you lied to me, I really want to know, what's your, come on, tell me what, I'm your friend, come on, Samson, make it worth your while. And Samson, okay, new ropes. Now, this is an interesting one to me, because they already tried that. If you remember at Etam, he said, bind me with new ropes.
That's right, yeah.
And they bound him with new ropes, and they brought him down with brand new, never used ropes. And what did he do? Popped them loose and killed them all. Yeah. So, come on, guys, you should know new ropes aren't going to work. They tried it anyway. And so then, that didn't work out well for them. So he said, well, if you'll take my hair and weave it into the loom. Now, this takes a little bit of explanation. Working at the loom was a female employment. And Delilah's loom appears to have been close at hand. It was a very simple construction. The woof was driven into the warp. Now, I have no clue what this is talking about. Not by a reed, but by a wooden spatula. The extremity of the web was fastened to a pin or stake fixed in the wall or ground. And while Delilah sat squatting at her loom, Samson lay on the floor with his head reclining on her lap, a position very common in the East. Now, the pin was put in a socket and kept the weave tight. So, have Samson, he's laying on the floor, and she takes his hair and weaves it into whatever it was she was weaving, probably clothes. That was the main thing she'd be probably weaving. And as she wove his hair into that, they had this pin with the attached to the bar, and it would take and move that in to the socket and force it down, and that way when you pulled on things, it kept everything tight. So when she got through, he was part of the loom or whatever she was making. His head was woven in and tight right into that with the pin in the wall or the floor, and that would be a good sized pin because there was a lot of pressure that was put on the loom. So here he is laying there, and she says, Samson, the Philistines are on you. And of course what she expected was he went, I can't get up, I'm down here, and they could jump right on him. Well, it says he didn't even bother to get out of the loom. He just stood up, pulled the pin out, pulled the loom up in the air, and here he is standing here with his loom in his hair, and the pin's laying over here. You can picture this, and he's got this long hair, and here he is, and whatever the men were in the room that were with him, they had a problem. And I'm sure they had a big problem when he got through. So you'll notice that it came from bowstrings to ropes to hair, getting closer and closer to where his secret was. And that's the way the devil wants to work at us. He wants us to get just a little bit closer all the time. He doesn't walk in and say, okay, quit praying. You're done. He walks in and he says, oh, you can't pray an hour today, however long people pray, it depends on, you can't pray an hour today because you have to go at 2:15 instead of over here, and so you can only pray for 45 minutes today. And then the next, well, yeah, I need to pray, but you can't because, so you can only go for a half hour today. Well, you can't because now you can only pray 15 minutes. Well, you really can't pray today at all because, you know, and so he takes us from where our strength is and gradually weans us off of our strength. Okay? And that's what was happening here with Samson. He was doing it himself, but you see the thing was he was getting closer and closer to letting him know where his strength was. Now the devil knows where our strength is. That's, you know, he knows that. But he uses exactly the same process. A little bit at a time, chipping away until finally it's gone. And he finally told her. Now notice after days, after days of whining and crying to Samson, you haven't told me, Samson, if you love me, you tell me, Samson, you know, and pressing him and, you know, whining on his shoulder and carrying on. And Samson, he's really in a problem because he loves this woman. And, you know, what is he going to do? It says his soul was vexed to death. He was about to die, he thought, from this. I mean, here's a woman I really love and she's bugging me. You know, I have to answer the question. And so he told her. And as soon as he told her, she knew he was telling the truth because it was different. And so after he'd left her house, probably for that time, she called the lords of the Philistines and says, now I have the answer. And it says the 5 lords, they came to her and each of them gave her the money. Now she's an extremely rich woman. And next time Samson came, she put him to sleep. Now, a lot of the commentaries and stuff read in there that she gave him some kind of a potion that put him to sleep. You'll remember that the little woman with the tent peg, you remember? Yeah. She gave him warm milk and he fell asleep. So maybe he gave Samson warm milk and, you know, and he fell asleep. And while he was sleeping, she had him come and shave his head. Now, they didn't shave it probably. He'd never had scissors on his head. So the 7 locks were just taken off. He wouldn't have known it was happening. She may have taken a knife and just slipped them through. And when she told him, the Philistines were upon him. But notice, first of all, that she tormented him. She then began to torment him, and his strength left him. I think we have 2 things here. First of all, he had his hair cut, you know, and when she tormented him, that means she turned on him. Ha, Samson, hey, dummy, guess what's happened now, you know. And he woke up and his strength was gone. And I can see Samson, he's probably a little bewildered. Because this is the only time in this whole time here that we read through that he says, I will go out as always and shake myself. The word shake comes from the same word they use for a lion's mane. And so you can think about a lion, you know, when a lion shakes his mane, that mane just, he had that long hair. And probably when he needed the Spirit of the Lord, he would shake his head and the Spirit of the Lord would come on him. He went out to shake his head and there was no hair and there was no Spirit. And he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. It's really hard, you know, to know when the Spirit of the Lord has departed from you. And the reason is because we go through valleys and mountaintops. And, you know, we go through the valley, we can go through the mountaintop, but God's always there. And sometimes, our prayers don't seem like they're getting anywhere. It's not that God isn't hearing, God isn't there. But sometimes He lets us go through some of that so that we can become stronger. It's when we go through those low parts that's where we get our strength. And so it's difficult to sometimes to know, hey, He ain't going to help you anymore. And Samson found himself in that position. God was no longer going to help him. You remember earlier when we were talking about Judges that they cried out to God, and what did God say? I ain't going to help you anymore. Remember that? I'm not going to help you anymore. You just keep turn your back on me, it won't follow me. You're going to suffer for a while. And it wasn't until they previously to God that finally He changed His mind and came and helped him. So, it's not unusual for God to turn His back and walk away from somebody, or from a church. He will do that if we don't do what He wants us to do. If we allow ourselves to be put into that place to where we're no longer separated to God. You see, it wasn't the hair. The hair wasn't really the issue with Samson. That was the external part. The hair was merely a symbol. That Samson was set aside. He was consecrated, set aside. He was different from everybody else. He was raised different. He was expected to act different. And when Samson allowed that thing that separated him from everybody else to be taken away, he became like everybody else. And that's the key with us, that we have to realize we have supernatural power. We do. I mean, name anybody else other than a Christian who can walk in to God's throne room and ask for something. I mean, the world can beg, they can plead, but they cannot boldly walk into the throne room of God. Paul talks about it, and he says the reason you can do this is because you're separate. You're a separate people. You've been separated, set aside. You're not like the rest of the world. We're not of this world. We're just walking through it. And so we have something that is supernatural. That's why Jesus could say, greater works than these, the ones that I've done, greater works than these you're going to do. Superhuman. Wasn't any, look at the stuff God did. Jesus did. Look at what He did. We're going to do greater? Yeah. Superhuman, superheroes. But we have to rely upon that secret thing that we have. Now, we don't, when I say secret, we want the world to know, and there it is. We try to tell them, but they don't get it. But that secret thing is our separation to God, and that the secret thing is how we keep that separation. Through prayer, Bible study, daily praying to God. We had a Bible study, or a prayer meeting the other night, CMA, and a little devotional, and it came to me about prayer. Paul said that we are to pray continually. Be continually, and how can you be continually in prayer? Most of us think about prayer in terms of, we go down to the altar and we kneel down, or we go into our closet or on a couch and we kneel down and we pray. And that's prayer. We can't do that all day. We can't do that all day and night. You got to work. You got to do things, right? So how can you be continually in prayer? And it came to me that very simple. Prayer should not be a ritual. Prayer should not be something we recite. Prayer should be something that we say to this God that is so ultra powerful that we have to recognize Him in all of His power and all of His glory, and we come before Him as a little snail, and we can walk in and talk to Him. God wants to be our friend. He does. He doesn't want to be this magnificent, powerful, separated God. He is, but he doesn't want to be that to us. He wants to be our friend. So what is prayer? Prayer is conversation. We need to have consistent, continual prayer or conversation with God. You know, Rick's always talking about, you know, somebody pulls in front of him, well, I'm probably worse than he is, and she's worse than I am, so, you know, I mean, somebody pulls in front, you know, and it's, what does that screwball think he's doing?
Yeah. I do not talk like that.
But what we should have, the kind of conversation we should have, is to say, hey God, did you see that? Did you see that? Jesus, did you see, what do you think about that? You see?
Mm-hmm.
Now that's kind of the extreme, but that's the point. We need to have this continual conversation with God. When we keep that continual conversation going, then he's there with us, and we don't have to shake ourselves, and he's not there. And Rick was right Sunday. He said sometimes we spend so much time talking we never shut up and listen.
Yeah.
I used to know, in fact he was our youth pastor at one of the churches I was at. And this guy, when he prayed, I mean, if you went in the prayer room with him, it drove me crazy. I could no more stay in the prayer room with him than fly. He would start in and he would open his Bible and he would quote from the Psalms and he would read from the Psalms. And, oh God, you are the God of this. And he would just read all the way through and it would go on for an hour. And he prayed and he'd get up and walk out. And I thought, okay, you told him everything that he told you. You're just echoing what God said. This is his word.
Mm-hmm.
What good was that? What was the purpose of going in there and reciting to God everything that was in his word? It didn't make any sense to me. And it wasn't, you know, he was gung-ho, fired up, kind of preaching young guy, you know. As far as I know now, he's a CEO of some philanthropic art institute or something up in the North Edmonds or someplace up there, and he hasn't preached in 30 years probably, and you know, he never learned how to have a conversation with God. One time we were talking, and I said, you know, we really need to get into the Word. We need to have some really, you know, some in-depth Bible studies and stuff. And he says, what do we need that for? And I looked at him and I just shook my head. You know, if you don't know what we need that for, then you're in the wrong profession. We never have too much of Bible, never have too much of prayer. But it's what kind of prayer? We label things as prayer that really aren't prayer. We really need to have that conversation. Keep that conversation going. Samson, he let that conversation, that ability to be separate from everybody else. We're the only ones that can have a real conversation with God. Think about it. The world can't do it. They can't go in the throne room. How can the world, could they ever talk to him? We can go in there and stay there. We can walk along, calm, talk to God, present things to him. That's our strength. And don't ever let anybody take that strength away from you. All right. All right, now, poor old Samson shook himself, expected to feel the strength. Nothing happened. Judges 16, verse 21 to 25. Then the Philistines took him, put out his eyes, and brought him down to Gaza. They bound him with bronze fetters, and he became a grinder in the prison. However, the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaven. Now the lords of the Philistines gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god, and to rejoice. And they said, Our God has delivered into our hands Samson our enemy. When the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, Our God has delivered into our hands our enemy, the destroyer of our land, and the one who multiplied our dead. So what happened when their hearts were merry? That they said, Call for Samson, that he may perform for us. So they called for Samson from the prison, and he performed for them, and they stationed him between the pillars. So it came a certain time. Now we don't know how long this was, and I don't personally think it was very long. And the reason is because it didn't matter how long Samson's hair was, it was that it began to grow. Okay? The strength of God was not dependent on how long the hair was. It was dependent on the fact that it was not cut. Now, evidently, while Samson was in prison, that he evidently renewed his vow of the Nazirite. And that was possible according to Numbers 6 and 9. And it specifically said that if the Nazirite came in contact with somebody that was dead, and the example is in the scripture, it's kind of funny, if the Nazirite is standing next to somebody who dies, guy has a heart attack and falls on you, you're unclean. You broke the Nazirite vow. And so what he had to do, had to have his head shaven or cut, and then he had these various sacrifices to do. And then when the hair began to grow again, then he was back to being a Nazirite again, and he was accepted back. Now, obviously Samson was not going to be able to do any sacrificing. He's in jail. He's in prison. And he's in prison grinding with a mill. Now, you've probably seen Bible stories, of Samson all muscled up, pushing this thing where an ox would push it. But actually, the prisoners were given small grinding mills. And it was a sign of disrespect, because the women did the grinding with these small stones. So they would sit in the prison and they would grind the meal, and that's what they ate. So they had to grind their own meal, which should have been done by women in those days as part of their thing. So it was a sign of disrespect. And evidently, while Samson was in there grinding away, he must have renewed his vows to God and talked to God about the situation, as his hair began to grow. Now, here's some things about this whole picture here. They took Samson back to Gaza, which was the stronghold. Now, in Gaza, there was this huge temple that was made to their god Dagon. Now, in the back of your book, your papers tonight, you see the picture here, the drawing of this temple. This was not the temple that was in Gaza. This is actually a temple that they found north of Tel Aviv. It was a Philistine temple to Dagon, but it would be made basically the same as this, only much larger. So what you're seeing here, they have unearthed this temple, and there's pictures of it. You can go out and look at it. Of course, it's rumble, but you can see where the two main posts were. You can see where all the stuff was in the temple, and the stairs and all of that. And this is what it would look like. It's a cutaway, of course. Now you notice the top is made out of wood. The wood, the roof rather, is made all out of wood. This whole thing was held up by those two main wooden pillars that you see in the middle. And this roof was very strong. The whole structure was extremely strong, because we'll find out in a minute that 3,000 people got up on the roof. Now what this roof had in it was cutouts, and they were like skylights. all around this roof. So when the people got on the roof, they could look through these openings and see what was happening down in the temple area. Now down below, this would be the lords of the Philistines and all the rulers and the really important people and rich people. And around the sides, they had benches. You see a couple of people in the back sitting on these benches. Around the side were plaster benches. And this was where they would all sit. So they'd go down in there and sit, and they would offer sacrifices or whatever they were doing for that particular event, and they would all be down there, and then the common people would be up on the roof, looking down through the holes. And so this was kind of the layout of the temple to Dagon. Now Dagon was a fish god. He was depicted as being the upper portion of him a man, and then the bottom portion a fish. And there's different takeoffs on that. Some of them it looked more like a man with a cape, a fish cape on him, and a big head, fish head over the top. You may see him depicted that way. But it was always some joining of human with fish. And he was the fish god. He was also considered a god of fertility. I think most of their gods were gods of fertility. Now they took him, brought him to Gaza, and they bound him with brass instead of leather. Most of the prisoners they'd have like handcuffs made out of leather, big leather straps, and that's how they bound them. But with Samson, because of his great strength, they used brass to bind him. Now it's also interesting that he was brought back to the place of his first sin. If you want to look at his visit to the harlot as being a sin, he was brought back to that place. Now whether that was his first visit or not, that's something else we don't know. Don't know. My guess is not, because it was seemed to be pretty common at that point with him. All right. So the lords of the Philistines, they decided to perform a great sacrifice to their god Dagon in this temple at Gaza. And it was to be in celebration of their capturing Samson. Now you would think they would do that right away. They captured Samson, let's go have a party. But in those days, nothing moved that fast. In today's world, you pick up the telephone, everybody would show up in 2 days, you have your thing put together. In those days, the Philistines covered a very large area. So how were they going to get the word out to everybody, get them all there, make all the arrangements, make sure the food is there for the feast, and all of this. So it probably took, I would guess, a couple of 3 months for them to put this big spectacle together that they were going to do. Even in today's world, how long does it take to put a Super Bowl halftime show together? It takes almost a year. So think about it in those terms. It took them a long time to put together this spectacle that they were going to do. And so the event was actually going to be a huge party with feasting, drinking, and entertainment. And they were going to recognize Dagon as their deliverer. All right. Now it says, when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God has delivered into our hands our enemy, the destroyer of the land, and one who multiplied our dead. So he was the one that was doing all kinds of stuff to them. We know he took foxes and wiped out their vineyards and all of that, and he probably did more stuff like that. It's just not recorded. And he was evidently quite a problem for them. But they brought him in, and it's interesting here. So it happened when the hearts were merry that they said, call for Samson, that he may perform for us. So they called for Samson from the prison, and he performed for them, and they stationed him between the pillars. So we don't know how he performed, but my feeling is that he was still extremely strong within himself. And so they probably brought him in and he did feats of strength. You know, lift up barbells and all of that, whatever, to show how strong he was. This was their entertainment. And when he had entertained them, they took him over and stationed him between the pillars. Now, this may indicate that they were planning on sacrificing Samson. They were going to kill him as a sacrifice to Dagon. And this is probably quite true. This would make sense. Notice also that the people were there. And when they saw Samson, notice what they did. They praised their God. In effect, what they were saying is Dagon is greater than Jehovah. Mm-hmm. Because we have defeated Samson, who was the judge or the emissary of Jehovah. Dagon is the greater God. Now, if they hadn't done that, I don't know if God would have granted Samson's request or not. You know, I don't really know. But I do know that when they put their God, before Jehovah, that was a big mistake. Because anytime you do that with God, God is going to prove you wrong. Mm-hmm. Because there's no other God formed that's greater than him. And he's going to make sure that you always know that. Sodom and Gomorrah had to find that out, along with the other sounds of the plains. The whole world had to find that out with Noah. So, yeah, what did they expect? So they put him between the pillars of the temple, and these pillars were approximately 7 feet across between them. So here were these two huge posts, about 7 feet across. Now, I can put my hands out here. I don't know, probably, I'm not quite 6 foot span, maybe 6 foot span. So you figure I need another foot just to reach them. Mm-hmm. Now that's how big Samson was. Now you look at some of these basketball players, 6'8", 6'9". Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, 6 foot span that's nothing to them. I mean, you know, they're 7 foot span, you know, they're out there, no problem. So we don't know for sure, because the temple in Gaza is under the modern city, so they can't excavate it, or they would have excavated it out. So they can only estimate, and so they figure it was about 7 feet across. So they stationed him there. All right, Judges 16, beginning verse 26. Then Samson said to the lad who helped him by the hand, "Let me feel the pillars which support the temple, so I can lean on them." Now I want to stop right here for just a second. First thing you notice, Samson was led in by a child, by a boy, a lad. He wasn't led in by a whole bunch of soldiers, a whole unit of soldiers, or, you know, the big guys in the army, so he wouldn't cause any trouble. A child. They put his eyes out for that purpose. How could he cause any problems if he can't see? Right? So here he is being led in by this child. Another sign of disrespect. He's so, look at him. Our kids can lead him around now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like you take a, you know, ferocious guard dog and you retrain him so the kids can play with him. You say, wow, he's so ferocious, look at kids play with him, no problem. And that's the way it was with Samson. And he asked the boy, he said, take me, he's here at the pillars, he said, put my hands on these pillars so I can feel them. And I want to rest. That's what he wanted, to lean against them and rest. All right. Verse 27, now the temple was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there. About 3,000 men and women on the roof, watching while Samson performed. So while Samson is doing his thing, whatever the performance was, they packed in. They packed into underneath the temple. They packed on top of the roof. This was the spectacle. They wanted to see Samson, the mighty Samson. Look what he can do. So here they are, 3,000 of them on the roof, plus however many they could pack underneath. Verse 28. Then Samson called to the Lord, saying, O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray. Just this once. O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. This is an interesting prayer. You know, here's Samson, and he understands the situation. He knows what these pillars are. He's probably seen the temple before. He knew how it was constructed. So what he's doing is saying, God, give me the strength to commit suicide.
Yeah.
Yeah. We say God, you know, won't answer certain prayers and he won't do this or that. We sometimes don't understand God as much as we think we understand God. What Samson was asking for is, I want to commit suicide. And the reason that I want to do this is vengeance. And what does God say about vengeance? He says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Who, you know, we can't take vengeance. That's against everything in Scripture, to pray that God will allow you to take vengeance on somebody. And he says, do it just this once. And I want vengeance for my eyes. Yeah. Eyes are a very important thing. And they put out their eyes in different ways, and we don't know how they did it. But we do know that it was not something that was acceptable. When you put out somebody's eyes, it was a sign of complete and utter disrespect, disregard, just everything for them. Now we know that some of the kings of Israel put people's eyes out and drug them around. I mean, you know, they did a lot of bad things. But it was just a sign of complete disrespect and all for Samson, and he was feeling that. But at the same time, we have to remember that Samson was more than just another man. Samson was indeed the hand of God. He wasn't just somebody living that was seasick and wanted to die, or too depressed and wanted to die. He was the hand of God. What Samson was saying, give me this one last time to push these pillars aside. Let me be your strength, your vengeance. Because what had Samson been doing? He had been the vengeance of God.
Yeah.
Now, I read these crazy commentaries, and some of these guys are really smart. You know, of course, they're, like I say, most of them were written back in the 1800s, some of them early 1900s. And, you know, they're able to look at the words and they're able to put, but when it comes to figuring some of this out, they're saying, well, this was a prayer that's really strange because God's never going to let somebody have a, you know. This was not really a request for suicide, even though it looks like it. He was saying, let me once again be your vengeance. Even though they put out my eyes, even though I can't see what's going on, even though I can't see the victory, let me be your vengeance one more time. It takes a different perspective. It takes a whole different perspective here. Strengthen me, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my eyes. Yeah. And Samson, verse 29, took hold of the two middle pillars which supported the temple, and he braced himself against them, one on his right and the other on his left. Then Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Now, there's another interesting little thing. Most of the commentaries agree that he probably prayed this prayer out loud. He wanted them to know where his strength was coming from. They wanted to know his secret. Well, he didn't have the long locks anymore. His hair started to grow. But where did his real strength come from?
Good.
He wanted them to know. You want to know where my strength came from? Let me tell you, one more time, I'm going to use it. One more time, God, just give me strength one more time so they know where my strength came from. You think your God is so strong over here, this idol Dagon standing here in the middle of the temple? You really think he's strong? Let me show you real strength that comes from Jehovah God. Yeah. He wanted them to know. And look what happened. Then Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he pushed with all his might. And those big old pillars began to move. And the temple fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead that he killed at his death were more than he killed in his life.
Yeah.
I mean, can you see the Philistines watching him up there? They'd seen him picking up weights here, you know. But I mean, come on. Not only are these pillars weighed down with the weight of the roof, there's 3,000 people up there. How much weight is that? If each person weighs 100 pounds, average, how much weight is that? And it's all forced down onto these pillars that are sitting in, they're wooden, but they're sitting in concrete little, like basins, they're not basins, but they're cut out and they're sitting down in these little sockets. So in order to move those, it took a tremendous amount of strength. He would have to either break the pillars or break the edges of those sockets so those pillars would slide out. And he began to, "Let me die with the Philistines." And I can see him start to push and everybody laughing. Ha ha, this is going to be good. Dagon's not going to let him push the, and you hear a squeak, and you hear a little squall, and you hear a little grind, and all of a sudden somebody starts to say, "Hey, I think we made a mistake," and down it came.
Yeah.
And the way this temple was constructed, you can notice if the roof comes down, the walls come with it. At his death, more than he killed in his complete life. Wow. Verse 31. And his brothers and all his father's household came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of his father Manoah. He had judged Israel 20 years. You know, this last scripture, this last verse, I can just picture this, you know. Here's Samson, he's in this rubble, he's underneath tons and tons of rock and wood and people and, you know. And here comes his brothers, all of his father's household. His father was rich, so there was probably a lot of people. And I can see them marching into the city. Nobody's going to bother them. Everybody got wiped out. All the kings are.
Yeah.
The Philistines no longer control anything.
Right.
All the leadership's dead. You see, Samson didn't just wipe out 3,000 people or more. He wiped out the entire leadership of the Philistine Empire. Who was to lead them? Nobody. And here comes Samson's family down into Gaza. And I can see them as they begin to move apart all the rocks and the debris, dead bodies, throwing them off until they find Samson. And I just kind of think they took Samson up and carefully wrapped that body and then brought him back. And I believe it was a joyous celebration, not because Samson was dead, but because Samson, who had been pulled away from God, who allowed the Spirit of God to leave him, had been redeemed back to that position again, and in that position had brought the final victory over the Philistines. Because you remember it said 20 years earlier that he was beginning to bring deliverance to the Philistines. And in his death, he completed that deliverance. I can just see him up the road, the body of Samson.
Yeah.
Our hero, our superhero. Yeah, he's dead now, but look what he did in his death.
Yeah.
As they put him in his tomb. Wow. All right.
I have a question.
What's that?
I have a question.
Yes.
What happened to, what happened to his wife?
I don't know that he ever got married.
Oh, remember that he,
Well, remember they gave it to somebody else.
oh, that's right, okay,
Yeah.
So,
that's right.
Yeah.
all right, now we're going to shift gears, and we're going to talk about a man who was not a judge. Now, just to kind of explain this, it looks like the book of Judges was basically about the judges, but then at the end there is some appendix that are put on the end of it, and they're stories that are not related to judges necessarily, but they happened during the time of the judges. You could almost say that Ruth would be, this would have been a place for Ruth to fall into one of these appendix, except it's a larger story. So this is one of these guys, and his name is Micah. Now this is not the prophet Micah. This is a different prophet. This is a different guy. His name was Micah. All right, so we start reading about Micah in chapter 17, verse 1. Now there was a man from the mountains of Ephraim whose name was Micah. And he said to his mother, "The 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, and on which you put a curse, even saying it in my ears, here is the silver with me. I took it." And his mother said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my son." So when he had returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother said, "I had wholly dedicated the silver from my hand to the Lord for my son, to make a carved image and a molded image. Now therefore I will return it to you." Thus he returned the silver to his mother. Then his mother took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to the silversmith, and he made it into a carved image and a molded image, and they were in the house of Micah. Absolutely confusing, right? Mm-hmm. Doesn't make any sense at all when you just look at what's happening here. But let's first of all look at when this must have happened. Most agree that it probably happened during the oppression of the Amalekites, and probably that would be Judges, the first chapter, 34th verse, in that area. And all that verse says is that the tribe of Dan, because this was the tribe of Dan here, Ephraim was Dan, were driven into the mountains. If you read that first chapter of Judges, and there you find that they were not allowed in the valleys, and they were driven up into the mountains, and they were living in the mountains. Mountains, Craigs of Ephraim, they're very craggy, rocky areas, and the enemy couldn't get up to them, but they lived up there, so the enemy couldn't get them. So they weren't down in the valleys; they were sent up there, and this would put this at about that time. Also, since they were up there, they were not able to get to Shiloh. Shiloh is where the ark was positioned. And, you know, the priests and all of that, we've talked about them, was at Shiloh. And so it was not uncommon for individuals to set up their own chapel or their own replica of Shiloh. We were talking about one, it slipped my mind, mine slipped out already. One of our earlier lessons, there was well, it was Gideon's father. There we go, finally came back. You remember Gideon? Wow, memory's bad these days.
With Gideon.
Yeah, actually, I love Gideon. Anyway, Gideon's father, you remember, he had his own private altar and stuff to Baal, right? Well, Israelites did the same thing. So they would have their own private temple or shrine to Jehovah. Right? So what his mother said here, she said she saved up these 1,100 shekels, and what she was going to do with it, she wanted to give it to her son to build a shrine with 2 images in it. Now we don't know what the images were of. We don't know. Could have been, one of the images might have been a seraphim, such was be on the altar of the ark. So perhaps the silver one was not an exact replica, but it was the idea that that would be one of them. The wooden, one of these was to be silver, one was wood. The other one we don't know. It probably may have been Moses or anybody, you know, a high priest or anybody. We don't know. But she had $1,100 saved up. And one day she went in and it was gone. Somebody had stolen her 1,100 shekels. And so she put a curse on whoever had taken the shekels, her money. And her son heard it. Now, you know, I don't know about other people, but I know if my mom prayed something, you better look out. You know, if you know, I mean, that was the way my mother was. We talk about continual conversations with God. That's the way my mom was. Now, she'd have her times at the couch with the windows open about the time I'd come home from school. And I'd be walking with all the guys coming home from school, and I could hear my mom a half a block away. And I looked for the nearest tree to hide under or someplace to go until she was through. I didn't want to be, you know. Oh, it was loud. I was elementary school too, you know. But she also had those conversations with God. She'd lose a needle. And she sewed all the time. And I can remember she'd drop a needle in the carpet and she'd say, Lord, where is that needle? I got to find it before somebody steps on it. Oh, there it is, pick it up. Couldn't find something, she would just say, Lord, I need to have that. Where, there, thank you. Lord, it's raining, I need a parking spot close to the door. Somebody would pull out, she'd pull right in. That was the way my mom talked to God. And this was possibly the way this lady was, but she put a curse on whoever took the money. And the boy had taken the money. Micah had taken that money. And when he heard his mom put a curse on whoever took the money, he knew when mom put a curse on somebody, they were cursed. And so he gave the money back. Smart boy. And so when he gave the money back, she blessed him. She reversed the curse. That's what this whole little thing here was about. And so then she took the money, she took 200 shekels and she gave it to the silversmith, and he made these carved images. The thing I think to look at here is this was not intended to be idol worship. Nowhere in here do you see this talked about being idol worship. All the other times it was, we're going to make an idol. No, she was making images. And the images were images that were evidently related to Shiloh, which is where the Ark of the Covenant was, and the tabernacle was in Shiloh. So that her idea was, we'll have our own place to worship here. We can't get there, and so we'll have our own place here. All right, so verses 5 and 6. Then Micah had a shrine, so he put a shrine together, and made an ephod and household idols, and he consecrated one of his sons who became his priest. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That verse right there explains, I think, what's going on here. Now the mother seemed to be in tune pretty much with God. She worshiped Jehovah. She wanted to please Jehovah. The son evidently was not so much in tune with Jehovah. He was a thief, to start with. And then we find that he built the shrine, just like Mom intended him to do, but instead of only having the two images that she was having made, notice it said he also had household idols. These were the little idols that were very common in that period of time. You'd have, an idol for the crops, and you'd have an idol for your sheep, and you'd have an idol for rain or whatever. And these were your little household idols that took care of your personal needs. They weren't expected to go to battle or anything and in great power, but that's who you prayed to if you needed rain or you needed your crops to come up. That was, you talked to your personal idol about that. So the boy had taken what was intended to be a worship to Jehovah and expanded that to include the personal idols. Now he had an ephod made, and evidently this ephod was very similar to the ephod that we saw earlier, and he probably had the Urim and Thummim made too. It doesn't say that, but quite possibly he did. The ephod wouldn't be of any use without those. So probably a place where he could ask Jehovah about things, and then he could also pray to his household gods about things. So he was covering all of his bases. How many times do we see people today that try to do the same thing? They want to rely on God, but they also want to cover all the bases. I want to make sure I've got my finances, and I've got my this and my that, or I have, I got the things out here that the world relies on. I've got those set up too, just in case God's not big enough to take care of my needs. That would be the equivalent of what was going on here. Then Micah took one of his sons and he consecrated him, and he became his priest. Now what is interesting here, these people were basically ignorant of Scripture. The average person in those days, they were almost illiterate. I mean, they could read, obviously, and stuff, but when it came to the Scriptures, if there wasn't a teacher around, somebody to help them, they couldn't just go out and pick up the Scriptures and read them. Nobody's going to have a whole cupboard full of scrolls. And so it wouldn't. There was no way that any boy who was not raised a Levite, raised to be a priest, could be any kind of a priest. He would have no clue of what to do. But he needed somebody to be his priest, so he consecrated or separated him, set him aside as the priest, which means he didn't have to do any work. He didn't, like the other boys, he had to go out and do work or whatever. No, his job was to take care of this shrine, and then to lead whatever service he needed led. Was the man to do it. Okay, so there wasn't any ruler, and that also means there was no central worship in Israel at this time. Every man did what he thought was best. And I think maybe this is one reason why you never see God condemning Micah. There's no talk of condemnation here. Doing what he thought was right. And sometimes God puts more, recognizes more recognition, I guess, on what the reason men do things more than what they do. It's easy for us to condemn somebody, but if you have somebody that doesn't know and they're doing something with the right heart, I think God looks at that rather than what they're actually doing. And I think we see that in some of these foreign countries where the Word of God is not prevalent where, you know, you see people and they hear about Jesus and so they're worshiping Jesus in very strange ways. You know, things that we say, you can't do that. But they don't know.
That's right.
They're giving God, they're worshiping God the way they think they should do it. And I think God puts some credit to that. So we never see them punished for this. We will see that Micah's misplaced in what he did, but that'll be coming. All right, moving on. Verse 7. Now there was a young man from Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah. He was a Levite and was staying there. Now, right off the bat, we know this is not possible because the Levites were not in the same tribe as Judah. So what this means is this was a Levite who had probably been sent to Bethlehem as a minister, missionary, young man, perhaps to going to school there as a young man, learning to be a priest in Judah, in other words, in the tribe of Judah. But he was a Levite. It also could mean possibly his mother was of Judah, his dad was a Levite. But either way you look at it, you can't be in both tribes. You had to be one or the other. All right, verse 8. The man departed from the city of Jerusalem in Judah to stay wherever he could find a place. Then he came to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, as he journeyed. What this says is that he left Jerusalem and he decided he was going to find some place to minister, some place to be, or the place meant of employment. And since the only way Levites were employed as priests, he was looking for some place to be employed as a priest. We would say today, this guy came out of Bible school and he's looking around for a church to pastor. That would be the same thing. So he was going to travel around until he found a congregation that needed a pastor or a place that needed a priest. All right, and then he came to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah as he journeyed. So he probably stopped at Micah's house to see if he could spend the night, which was that custom in those days. And Micah said to him, "Where do you come from?" So he said to him, "I am a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, and I am on my way to find a place to stay." And Micah, he says, "Oh, hey, look at this. Can you believe this?" He may have even called his wife in. Can you believe this? His mother, I mean. "Can you believe this? I've got a shrine built and everything. And here comes a Levite looking for employment as a priest." Yeah. Micah said to him, "Dwell with me and be a father and a priest to me, and I will give you 10 shekels of silver per year, a suit of clothes, and your sustenance." So the Levite went in. So here Micah says to this guy, "Well, you looking for a place to be a priest? I need a priest. So let's work this out. I'll pay you 10 shekels a year." That wasn't very much, 10 shekels. But he said, "I'll give you a change of clothes." And that probably meant mostly vestments and things for the priest would need, as well as probably his casual clothes as well. "I'll take care of your clothes and your sustenance." In other words, I'll feed you. I'll feed you and take care of you. And in addition to that, I'll give you 10 shekels a year. And so the young man agreed. As most Bible school graduates do, they'll grab the first opportunity that comes along and feed. To get fed, that's, if you get a job, that's the important issue, sometimes. Verse 11, then the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man became like one of his sons. What that means is that Micah treated him just like his own sons. He was fed, he ate at the table with him. When they went someplace, he went with them. You know, he was treated like one of the family. So Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his priest and lived in the house of Micah. Now, of course, Micah was not qualified to consecrate anybody from as far as the priesthood was concerned, and that. But what he meant here was the same as with his son. He set him aside. He was the priest. Wasn't gonna go out work in the field, not gonna take care of anything else. His job was to be his priest. Now notice he said, I want you to come to me, I want you to be my father. Young man, I want you to be a father and a priest. That doesn't work well if you're younger than Micah. How are you going to be his father? You know? But what was meant there was teacher. You be my teacher and my priest, my worship leader. Okay? You offer sacrifices or whatever we need, and you teach me, or us, probably the whole family. So in this way, Micah was asking the priest to teach them the ways of the Lord while he led them in worship. So Micah wasn't such a bad guy, he just didn't know what he was doing. So he said, I need to find out what I need to do. Verse 13, then Micah said, now I know that the Lord will be good to me, since I have a Levite as priest. Oh boy. This is where he got a little bit off kilter. He thought simply because he hired a Levite to be his priest, that God was not going to take care of him. But it takes more than just having a Levite, having a pastor, have somebody to teach you and take care of you. You have to give yourself over to that. You can't just let it all lay on this young Levite guy to take care of you. And we're going to see where this leads you next week. But that's it for tonight. Any
what
questions?
happened to his son that he
I
consecrated?
have no idea. He probably unconsecrated him. I don't know what he did. Maybe, and he may have made him just the priest's assistant, you know, or something
Yeah.
too. You never know. It doesn't cover his son. It leaves his son off. But anyway, any questions?
I'll try.
All right, that's it for tonight. We have about 3 more weeks in Judges, it looks like.
Okay.